within the IT industry, DevOps has really opened people's eyes to the value of cross-functional collaboration. Is the same thing happening in other industries as well? Perhaps not under the banner of DevOps, but the
absolutely.
same concept.
So this is the very interesting and actually fascinating fact for me, and the reason why I'm here and how I started getting involved with DevOps in the first place. So my approach had to do with how cross-functional teams come together to solve complex problems, and conflicts more specifically. At some point a year ago, I came across DevOps, and I saw so many parallels to other transitions in other fields out there. So some of the examples I'm giving in my talk concern academia, first of all. Academia is very, very big the past few years in interdisciplinary studies. How we are able to harness the power that we have developed through the knowledge of all these years, decades of vertical specialization through cross-functional collaboration. How can we break the barriers that we have created over the years in the academic field and bring them now together to maximize and solve problems that we haven't been able to solve in the past? So the medical field is, I think, the best example of how forward-thinking they are in this way, and specifically cancer research. So cancer research has been phenomenal in being so productive and actually leading the way, paving the way for the rest in this kind of systems thinking. And there's a specific example that I like, just using words like bio-nanotechnology kind of gives a snapshot of the potential that we can harness power from different disciplines in a way that breaks the barriers that we have been facing in the past through our individual disciplines.
So even the language is
interdisciplinary. Even
right?
the language denotes that level of collaboration.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So I think the talk that you're referencing is titled "The Power of Conflict."
Yeah.
In that talk, I guess you explore, among other things, conflict resolution culture systems. I wanted to ask you, what are those? So
again, this is kind of a convoluted meaning. I will just break it down in two separate, distinct instances. The first one is, now that conflict in itself, how we use conflict. So for the longest time, we have been dealing with conflict because of our cultural nuances that we have been used to as a negative thing, as something that's bad, something to be avoided. Especially because of the culture, even in the Western world, sometimes this cutthroat approach, which is more like destructive culture, destructive connotation of conflict, it's the connotation that we're used to, or in other cultures, it's completely to avoid it because it's a bad thing. So what I'm saying is, the only way that we as teams are able, or as a society, are able to harness our collective impact and our collective capability is through productive conflict, is through engagement, is through having this kind of interaction that you can see as a conflict, but in a way that takes us forward. And there's an example, actually, I really like. I didn't give it in my talk yesterday, but I like it because it's from Steve Jobs from 20 years ago. It's from a lost interview of his, even though he's controversial in the field, but that specific example I really like. And he was saying about when he was young, he was hired by an older man around the corner of his house to mow the lawn there. So he was mowing the lawn, and at some point the guy went like, "Come with me, I want to show you something." So he takes him into his garage, and there he had this barrel, like a metal barrel with a band and a small motor. And he told Jobs, "You know what, go to the back in the yard and get 2-3 rocks, like dirty rocks from the yard." So he goes, he brings them back, and you see these 3 rocks that they're like irregular, full of dirt, like ugly looking. So he said, "Put them inside the barrel." So he put them inside the barrel. He and the older man put water and sand inside. He closed the small door of the barrel and turned the motor on. So at that point, the barrel started rumbling. It was very noisy, right? So he said, "Let's come back here tomorrow morning. Let's see what happened." So they go there tomorrow morning. They shut off the barrel from turning, and they open it, and out come these 3 polished, beautiful rocks that, through this concept like friction and noise, from something that was irregular and without shape and raw, you have this beautiful final product. So the way I see culture as conflict is this metaphor by Jobs, even though he applied it in a very different way and it's controversial, so I want to make this distinction. Right. I'm just taking this example of you need to have in teams people, I have this idea, you have this idea, let's try and make some friction to come up with something polished. So this is the first part of conflict as productive to polish our ideas. And the second part is we need to consider ourselves as part of a system. And that's the only way that we can maximize our efficiency, our innovation, and appreciate the unintended consequences of our actions in a way that we have a more effective strategy in the end. Otherwise, we have piecemeal approaches here and there that don't translate to the greater effectiveness that we are seeking. And this is kind of a byproduct of our silos that we have built over the years. We are more distant from each other, from the product in itself, but we desperately need to consider ourselves as part of the system. And again, the medical field has been pretty big and successful in this. So this is one of the things I'm talking about. Conflict culture and then systems thinking coming together to harness the collective capacity that we have all together as teams.
What are the steps organizations can take to begin using conflict in a productive way? I guess it would be the equivalent of how do they use the barrel, right? How
Exactly.
How do they make that happen?
So this is the million-dollar question. And there are certain limitations, there's certain barriers for this that resisting change. And some of them have to do with how our business, even business schools, the mentality that how this is replicated. So the problem is you cannot quantify it from the beginning. This is something that's like a soft element of building a social capital within a team, building an identity for the team to be more effective. So you need to translate this. So in order to implement such a change in a cultural level, not in a superficial way, because many ways we've seen even with quality assurance, with other culture out there, executives tend to use it sometimes more like a fad, we use a language, but it's the superficial application of the actual premise that this stands for. So the first thing you need to do for me in order to have this actual systemic change throughout the system, you need top leader engagement and investment in this to appreciate how tedious this is, but this is a fundamental change. But the next thing you need to really do is appreciate the fact that the only way you can do this is through bottom-up approaches. People who are the stakeholders in your team, in your organization, become members of designing what this looks for you. And the reason is to implement this change is there's a distinct difference from the best practices of the past, how we used to do. These are the best practices, come here, apply them, or having this external consultant coming in and say, okay, this is what you should do. Now what we're seeing is with this specific kind of thinking, the only way you can apply is to produce what's best for you. You need to come up with what works for you. For example, Valve is very productive, the game developer. They're pioneers in the way they have been also having been able to produce amazing product, but the structure that they have been using, this flat structure that's very, very promising, very inspiring, works for them, right? Then Apple other areas, or Google, or Facebook, or Etsy, I've heard of Netflix. Whatever works for them, works for them. You can take some good practices to educate learn what you do, but in the end, the bottom line is we need to understand that we have to produce what works for us, and that's the only way to implement something that ensures the commitment of all the members. Otherwise, it will be, again, one fad, applying something and then phasing out.
There are some conflicts that are so deep-seated and that seem so complex that nobody thinks they can be solved. What are the very first steps you take to even taking those on? So
this is a difficult question, and to be honest,
30 seconds or less.
To be honest, the conflict resolution field in general, for a long time, even though there's no set field, but the people who have been, from an academic perspective, dealing with these problems, hadn't been able to address this. Recently, there was a team at Columbia University, and it's been led by a professor called Peter Coleman, researched those specific problems. What defines those problems, those what we call protracted, intractable conflicts, in a way that they resist the conventional means of resolution, like mediation, negotiation, dialogue. Some of them, specifically, they have quantified that around 5% of conflicts to be the case. So, in order to approach this, what they did is they started educating the process of analyzing them with systems thinking and complexity science. And what they found is one of the key dimensions that define those conflicts There are like different ones, but one of the things that I like mentioning more is the collapse of complexity. Something that is very, very complex collapses a simple thing. You are this, you are that, you're black, you're white, and you forget what the complexity, what defines you at that point, what it is. It's just this one thing. So one of the first things that you can do is figure out a way, a safe way, to introduce complexity back in the perception of the people. They're not just developers, they're also good people as well. They're not just operations, they're also your friend, they're your colleague, their father, their mother. So try to come up with participatory approaches that in many ways they don't have a tangible outcome in the end other than coming people together in a way that they can exchange views about the same thing that has been affecting them in different ways. And the reason why I'm saying this is if you bring people together who are stuck in this scenario without them expecting an outcome, it's a good thing. For the reason that I'm not telling you come here and you need to figure it out by the time that we are done with this you will have solved this, because this is very tricky. What I'm saying is come here, I don't expect anything from you, no strings attached. Let's just try to exchange ideas. Let's just try to figure this out together, what this looks like. And what you do, and actually there's this very specific methodology that we're using, which is systems mapping. We try to map the system through feedback loops, how different elements in the history of the experience that they have been having affect them in different ways. So if X party does its own mapping, like this happened and this affected me this way, etc., and then Y party does the same thing, then you can kind of exchange ideas and views and say, you know what, I thought that this didn't affect this way, or I thought perhaps it was different. So you try, what the bottom line, to introduce complexity back in the perception of people that has collapsed in something that's very simplistic, and refrains them from taking the extra step and moving outside the comfort zone that they have been stuck in because of the conflict.
You don't often hear about adding complexity to a system
to
try to solve a problem. That's
yeah,
really
I know. It's counterintuitive in some ways.
That's interesting. So last question for you. What people or projects are you following these days?
So this is the fascinating part where I'm right now. I first came across DevOps earlier this year, like actually 6 months ago. And it was from a friend of mine who works for Vimeo, Dieter Platting. And he told me, your stuff, the conflict stuff, this is DevOps stuff. So I started looking more into it. I gave a couple of DevOps talks. So now I've seen that ripeness has been building in this field to address these issues. We couldn't have done the same discussion somewhere else, like in a banking conference. This would have been an impossible discussion to make there, right? So what I'm interested in is to actually identify those individuals, groups, companies who embrace this in a way that ripeness is at the critical level, that we can address it and analyze it together and take it to the next level. So for me, it's kind of the beginning, because what the technology field has been experiencing increasingly the past couple of years, and I think what I'm hearing from many, many people in this conference is you can track this ripeness through the progression of velocity conferences, how increasingly organizational culture has been becoming more and more salient in the agenda of the conference. Is the next step for me. So I don't have something specific now because I'm very new in this. I'm trying to bring the outsider's perspective, but at the same time, it's the fascinating fact that I feel also kind of seeing the train moving, and I really want to see how can I help it go further.
Great. Well, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.